Hello everyone, my name's Joel, and today we're going to be talking about academic writing tips. I'm just going to be covering the common mistakes that I've seen with my own students and giving some tips about how people can avoid them. So the first thing to remember is the formatting. So you should make sure that the font that you're using is easy to read. The font size should be between 10 and 12. Don't write in capitals. Don't write in bold or italics. You will have some italics in your references, but other than that, you shouldn't be writing the thing in italics. It's really helpful if you can double space it so that there's enough space in there for your teacher to offer some comments or things like that if you're lucky enough to have the chance to get feedback. And of course, you should have margins on the sides. So before you even begin writing, you should start planning. And a good way is to make a mind map. So you can actually think about your topic and then write down the stuff that you know and decide what you'll use. It may be that you don't use everything in your mind map. You may just use some themes that you can back up with evidence, and other branches of your mind map may become irrelevant tangents. But all of that's fine because a little bit of planning at this stage can save you time later, especially if you find that you have been writing straight from the get-go and you go off on one of these tangents and later you're like, well, hang on, I've gone off on a tangent I didn't want to go off on, and then you have to rewrite the whole thing. So to avoid that, a little bit of planning will help. Okay. Some more things to avoid is to not use contractions. Contractions are words like don't instead of do not. So contractions are informal and shouldn't be used. Slang and informal words of any sort shouldn't be used. So we've got things like kids. Kids actually means baby goats, not children. If you want to talk about children, then you should use the word children or offspring. Similarly, you've got gonna instead of going to. So even though you might say that, you won't write it. You've also got to be careful of idioms. Don't use idioms, or at least use them very sparingly because they are informal and they sound quite cliche. Don't use personal pronouns like I, we, our, or you. Especially avoid them when writing things like I think or I believe. Although we want to encourage you to tell us your opinions, we don't want you to openly state them with using words like I think or I believe. Although it's true, you can use phrases like that in an IELTS academic writing test. In reality, it's not academic, and you shouldn't be using that for your university or TAFE course, and you shouldn't be using that for academic writing. Avoid overgeneralizations. So saying that everyone agrees with this or something is common sense or that no one can disagree with it. It's impossible to actually prove that, and so just to avoid it, don't overstate things. So as part of this effort to try to increase your academic vocabulary, you should avoid using words like good, bad, nice, big, small, very, or really. Any sentence with really can be changed just by crossing out really. Words that go with very should just be changed to a stronger word. Or words like good and bad, nice, big and small have a lot of synonyms that you can use instead of them. So you should have no problem trying to cut those words out of your academic writing. A really big one is to not use get, got, or lots of. You should Avoid get or got because they are informal. Another one that I see sometimes is gendered language. So, as much as possible, we should try to avoid talking about his and him or her. Although a lot of people who speak English as a second language may question being able to use they or their as a gender neutral pronoun, it is becoming more and more acceptable and these days is noticeable as an alternative. You could also use his or her, but the problem with that is you then cannot keep putting his before her, like always using his or her. You'll have to change it up sometimes to say her or his. And in general, that becomes quite difficult to read over and over again. So using they and them is probably better. Anyway, that also counts for nouns. So, words like actor and actress, doctor and female doctor. There's no need to talk about gender with those sorts of things. So cut out all gendered language if you can. Of course, if you're talking about somebody who is a male, then you are using a pronoun to refer to that person, then you could say he and him. But when you're talking about general people, avoid gendered language. Phrasal verbs are also informal, and so you should try to replace them as part of your efforts to improve your academic writing. So instead of throw away, we have discard. Instead of take away, remove. So those words sound more formal than their phrasal verbs. One thing you really have to do is paraphrase. Don't just copy and paste, write your own words. A good way that I do it is by replacing some words with synonyms and changing the sentence structure or joining two sentences together or separating a sentence into two smaller ones. No, you just cannot do one of them. You've got to do at least two. All right. And so it's very important to paraphrase. If you don't, you could be accused of plagiarism, which is stealing other people's ideas. And that's taken very seriously in tertiary education. You could find yourself failing an assignment or being kicked out of the school or embarrassed professionally if you copy other people's work. Okay, so we've talked about what not to do. Let's talk about what you should try to do. And that is try to increase the academic vocabulary that you're using. Take note of any new technological or specific words used in your sources of information and try to use them in your writing. Of course, you should never use words that you don't understand the meaning of, but when you encounter new words, research them and try to get a handle on how to use them properly. You should also try to make your writing more complex. If you write a lot of short sentences, shooting them at the reader like a machine gun, they can sound very choppy and can be quite difficult to read after a while. So you've got to change the rhythm of your writing by adding some complex and compound sentences, just to mix it up. So I'll explain what these are, but I won't go into too much detail. A compound sentence joins two independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction. Coordinating conjunctions include for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so, the fanboys. An independent clause is a clause or a part of a sentence which could be a sentence by itself. So it makes sense by itself. He was tired. That makes sense as a complete sentence. And so we're joining the two things that could be sentences by themselves with a coordinating conjunction. Complex sentences are a bit different. You've got that independent clause, like I just mentioned, that stands by itself, and a dependent clause that can't stand by itself. It's like a fragment. It doesn't make sense as a sentence by itself. So we've got the sentence, when we buy his birthday cake, we have to make sure it's lemon. We have to make sure it's lemon would make sense by itself as a sentence. But when we buy his birthday cake, doesn't make sense by itself. So it's a dependent clause. Then we've got compound complex sentences, which are when two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses are joined together. So here in the example, we've got the independent clauses in yellow with a coordinating conjunction in red and the dependent clause in blue. Okay, so the other side of this is run-on sentences. Run-on sentences just keep going and going and going, and they become unreadable in the end. And so it's a good idea to look at your sentence, and if you feel it's going too long, for example, it's 3 lines or 17 words long, you might want to cut it into 2 sentences or divide it using some coordinating conjunctions and a comma or a semicolon. But really, you have to look at that and make sure that people can read that sentence without forgetting what the start of the sentence is by the time they get to the end. We're going to talk more about referencing later, but you should try to use in-text citations. And there's 3 ways to do it. The first way is to say, according to Hopkinson, and then the date. Then you could have Hopkinson, date, states. Now this word states could be any verb. You might use describes, explains, illustrates, argues, claims. Any verb that you think accurately describes what that person is doing. And then the last way is just to put their name and the date at the end of the sentence, in parentheses. And of course, the other thing you can try to do is put the page number in as well. Then we have referencing, so you've got to put a reference list at the end of your essay or report, and you should put that in alphabetical order. And when doing a reference list, we're using the Harvard system here, and we've got the last name, the initials, the date, the title in italics, the place where it was published, and the publisher. You know, a lot of learning also goes on after the class, and I really would like to recommend to you that after you finish the class and you are thinking about your essay, have a chat with other people in the class and tell them about your essay. Talking about your essay topic is going to help you organize it in your own mind. And if you are talking about it and you realize, oh, I don't really completely understand something, or I'm not explaining this very well, that means you can go and sort of target your research to be able to do that better. It really is a great way to sort of sort out how you're going to write your essay. So I really do encourage that you find some study buddies and try talking about and telling each other about your essays. And remember, you can always ask a librarian for help. They are very helpful people. Librarians are wonderful places. So I'd like to thank everybody for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll be making more later on this topic, and we'll get more into referencing and a few other things like paragraph writing. Anyway, that's all from me for now. Hope you've had fun. Bye-bye.